A bill that would actually ban some Christian books is working its way through the California State Assembly. Sponsors of Assembly Bill 2943 actually want to outlaw books that basically teach against homosexuality and gender identity.
California is looking to pass a bill that could ban the sale of Christian books that address issues of homosexuality and transgenderism. Proceedings to pass the law are taking place quickly in the state, and the bill could pass in the California Senate as soon as late May.
All right, Travis, talk to me about this bill. This is essentially criminalizing religious beliefs, and I don't mean to speak in hyperbole here, but if this bill were to pass, would this prohibit the sale of the Bible that teaches these things about sexual morality?
Well, literally, according to how this law is written, yes, it would. This is, PC culture, politically correct culture, gone horribly awry. This is really directly hitting at our First Amendment rights as American citizens. Now the Democrat legislators in this building right behind me, the California State Legislature, they want to tell you how to think, what sort of books that you can read, write, and purchase. It is completely wrong. It is absolutely against our First Amendment rights. And I, for one, will be a vocal opponent against this if it ever hits the Assembly floor.
The higher powers in this world, more specifically in California, are in the process of making a bold, defiant move against God and his people. And it's pretty frightening. Not so much for the people of God, but for those who are planning this move. Those who are trying to enforce legislation that will prevent groups and individuals from using the Bible as a witnessing tool to reprove sin alongside share the gospel of Jesus Christ. They're entering into God's jurisdiction, and the outcome for them will not be pretty. In Daniel chapter 6 in the Bible, we have a king called Darius who was coerced into signing a law that will prohibit the freedom of religion, which is similar to what we see happening today. It was after he signed this law, Daniel, a Christian and one of the presidents over the kingdom, was caught boldly praying to his God, and because of this he was thrown in the lion's den. However, to the surprise of many, he did not die. The angel of the Lord stopped the mouth of the lions, and after a night in the lion's den, he came out unharmed. When King Darius realized he was duped into making this law, he threw the men, their wives, and their children into the lion's den, where they were ripped into pieces, dead, eternally lost. But the angel of the Lord protected Daniel. And likewise he will do with us. And even if they are able to kill the body, as it is written, we are not to fear him who can kill the body, but rather him who can kill the body and the soul. As all this we see in this earth is temporal. We are pilgrims passing through. But those men not only suffered the first death, they will also suffer the second death, which is eternal destruction. And likewise, it is so for those who reject God and try to prevent those from seeking him and teaching the Bible. The end result is eternal destruction. And through this story, the Lord is teaching us that the government should never, ever get involved in religion or prevent the free exercise of it, as the end result will only be destruction. Likewise, as it is wrong for the government to prohibit religion and freedom of speech, it is also important to recognize that it is just as wrong for anyone to force religion. Again, in the same book, the book of Daniel, we have an illustration of this when King Nebuchadnezzar tried to enforce religion. In the book of Daniel, he set up an image and commanded all to worship that image, and those who refused to worship that image were to be punished with death. However, 3 Christians named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego realized that the king was entering into God's jurisdiction by trying to force religion, as it was against freedom of conscience. So they refused to bow down and worship the image. And because of this, they were sent to die in the burning, fiery furnace. But did they die? No. One like the Son of Man came to their rescue. However, the ones who placed them there were to perish. This is again confirming that the government, the powers that be, should never, ever get involved in religion. It is interesting to note that the founding fathers that established the Constitution in America also recognized this. The First Amendment in the US Constitution is actually an illustration of the moral purpose of these two examples we briefly examined in the book of Daniel. As the First Amendment states, Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now note that Nebuchadnezzar was trying to enforce religion. It continues, or prohibit the free exercise thereof. Bear in mind that Darius was trying to prevent the free exercise thereof. You see, those men who wrote this constitution understood the history recent to that time. They saw the example of Europe during the Dark Ages when the papal church was ruling through a church-state system. They saw the destruction and anarchy it caused and how it led many innocent souls to lose their lives for refusing to accept the teachings of the church as they tried to enforce religion. Likewise, they saw France during the French Revolution, how the country was in ruins after they tried to ban the Bible and the free exercise of religion, and by persecuting anyone that looked like a Christian. So with these two examples set before them, they wanted America to be different. It was to be a nation that would not force, neither prohibit religion, and this was the secret to their prosperity and success. Unrecognized by many, those principles are also built on the Ten Commandments. Have you, dear listener, ever wondered why the Ten Commandments were written on 2 tables of stone? God could have easily written it on 1, maybe 3, but he chose to write it on 2 to teach us an important teaching. You see, the 10 Commandments are broken down into 2 important principles, and that is to love God and to love your neighbour. The first 4 commandments are all related to my personal relationship with God, and it is not for the government to get involved in any of those commandments or dictate to me how I should enforce those principles in my life. It's personal between me and my Lord. However, the last 6 commandments is all about how I treat my neighbour. Read it and you will see it for yourself. And regarding these last 6 commandments, it's okay for the government to get involved in these, as their role is to preserve the civil harmony of society. And in relation to these laws, we are to be subject to the government. That is why in Romans 13, speaking of the civil power, the Apostle Paul tells us, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God, the powers that be that are ordained of God." Here he is speaking about the presidents, the judges, and we are to be subject to them. And that includes Trump, believe it or not. Jumping down to verse 4, he continues, "For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil." So if we go against their laws, they have a right to punish us, throw us in prison. If we refuse to pay our taxes, there's a consequence for that. And God supports that. Verse 5, "Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honour to whom honour, owe no man anything, but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." He then continues, "For this thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. And if there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself." Now it's very interesting that the Apostle Paul only quotes the second table of the law, not the first, because he is emphasizing the point that we are to be subject to the higher powers, to the presidents, based upon the second table of the law, because that's their realm. Their role is to preserve the harmony of society. But they should never get involved in the first table of the law. Why? Because the end result always leads to innocent lives being lost. We see this in the life of Christ. Was a charge ever brought up against Christ that pertained to the second table of the law? Was he accused of beating up his parents, lying, stealing, murdering? No! All the accusations against him were based on the first table of the law, which Caesar had no business getting involved in, because it's not his realm. It was all related to his own personal relationship with the Lord. And that is something the government should never get involved in, because it leads to innocent lives being lost. And this will certainly be the end result if America goes against the First Amendment right. The end result guaranteed will only be anarchy and loss of life. The protection of God over that nation as a whole will be lost. So when we see these sorts of laws attempting to make its way through Congress that affects one to worship as they freely desire, then we are to protest. We are called Protestants for a reason. As an ambassador in this world, rarely should we get involved in politics, as this is not our home. When we become Christians, we are born again to another country, the heavenly kingdom. Therefore, we are to dissociate ourselves from politics, as this is no longer our world. It's not our home. We are pilgrims. It is Satan who is the prince of this world. However, when we see them trying to enforce laws that affect our God-given right, which is freedom of conscience, freedom to worship as one desires, then we are to protest, because they are entering into God's sacred jurisdiction. Those who try to enforce or prohibit religion are taking on a role which not even God himself does, and that is freedom of choice. This is why the world is as it is today. Love never forces, and God does not force us to worship him or not to worship him. He just gives us a choice, letting us know what the consequences will be. Likewise, we are to do the same for others.